I know that anyone working in the building and construction space is asking, what about the situation where you've got contracted works? You don't have WIP on the clock as yet. You've got a future expectation on the completion of contracted works that there will be WIP incurred to be invoiced, but that work has yet to be performed, nor the cost associated with generating that WIP incurred. How do you look at valuing that sort of intangible asset?
It's an interesting question. Construction businesses are a really common space for this, particularly, a lot of issues come up with construction WIP. You can have circumstances like you've talked about now where, for example, a job might have been won, sometimes even a deposit might have been paid, but no work might have been performed. And this is where you see scenarios where WIP intersects with revenue in advance and contract liabilities. But in those types of circumstances, often I think a really practical approach, and it's certainly consistent with what I see in the market happening when these types of businesses transact, is an approach that takes a pipeline view of this type of work, where often a percentage of the forward billing is attributed just for winning the job and can be put through as being a collectible component, and then the rest can go through as revenue in advance and have a contract liability attached to it. That to me is a sensible way to go about things. Sometimes it's sensible, sometimes it's not. That really often depends on the contract terms. But equally, there's often partial expenses that are incurred with these types of businesses, construction businesses in particular, and often there's a level up that needs to happen when calculating WIP. Often it's not contained in the financial accounts either. So we often have to do a lot of work around understanding, okay, what work has been conducted and not billed to a point in time, what costs have been incurred that are associated with doing that work, what additional work needs to be conducted to bring the work through to completion. These are all inputs in calculating a sensible idea as to what the WIP's worth at a point in time.
Look, I suppose now's an appropriate time to point out the obvious, that any of the advice that you're giving today is obviously incredibly general. And you need to look at the specific circumstances of the company and the business that you're valuing and the circumstances that it finds itself in. But it's really great to get some general principles of valuation in these situations from you today. People are looking at getting their businesses valued, and particularly the businesses that we are engaging with. They're in somewhat financial distress, and the costs and things like that are associated, a factor to be considered as part of a restructure. So if you were asking for a wish list of all the things that a client would come to you with to expedite a valuation, both in terms of the cost associated and the time to produce a valuation, what sort of information, what sort of data, what sort of records should people be able to bring to the table to expedite that process?
It goes without saying, financial information. So we're after financial reports, normally 3 years at a minimum, 5 years if possible. It's good for us to get a good picture as to what the financial performance is of the business. We're interested in understanding director salaries, so what salaries have been paid to directors or owners or associated people of the business, what roles they've performed for those salaries. The reason being is often directors might have been underpaid or overpaid or not paid consistent with the role that they do. It's very common to see those types of scenarios, and hence it becomes something that we might look to adjust in the valuation process from a process of determining the correct inputs to use when calculating value. Equally, businesses that have important customer contracts, we like looking at those, or if they have important leases for real property that's integral to the operation of the business, we always like to see those documents as well. Another common risk area is looking at revenue concentration. So plenty of businesses might receive revenue from a few key customers that are really integral to the performance of their business. We like understanding that so that we can assess risk, which is a really key input in valuing. Valuation is commonly around us looking at risk and us looking at income streams. So financials, any documents impacting or indicating risk factors, which I've mentioned a few just now, are really, really key. Valuations can be approached in a few different ways accordingly. What we tend to do as a firm is give clients options as to how they brief us and the scope of our valuation engagement. Sometimes we do what we call a value estimate, which is simply where we do a valuation method. We don't even do a report. It's simply a calculation, gives the clients a good idea, keeps the fees to a minimum, certainly less than $5,000. And it's something that we can turn around within a week or so. That's a really good entry level valuation engagement for clients that want to understand roughly what their business is worth. Sometimes we do short form valuations, which are sort of in between that and a formal valuation, and other times we do what we call formal valuation engagements, which are sometimes professional fees for those engagements are 15, 20, 25,000, but you get a picture for what's involved, and the time taken increases for the more complexity involved in some of those more formal valuation engagements. But
look, I'll take the opportunity to point out that when a liquidator looks at the sale of business prior to the commencement of a winding up, one of the key things that we look at is the valuation of the business and how the data in that valuation is applied to the sale of business transaction. What is really important is that the scope or the engagement of the valuer is considered to make sure that the valuer adopting or preparing a report for valuation has been adequately briefed and fully provided with all of the relevant information. In circumstances where directors have sought to manipulate the valuation process by being less than 100% transparent with their valuer, it kind of undoes the protections that was the point of obtaining an independent valuation in the first place. So transparency and completeness when briefing a valuer from the perspective of reviewing the transaction after liquidation is really, really important.
It's an interesting point, Liam, and certainly we find most clients are terrific. They want to tell us everything, and they want to inform us as to how their business works, what it does, why it makes money, why it might not make money, and that's really, really key for us. The greater the understanding we have, the better and the better place we are to do our work. Occasionally, I've certainly had clients where I'll have to ask questions a few different ways to get an answer that I think is reasonable or consistent with facts, and that's life. But certainly most clients are really open-minded and really liberal with disseminating information to us, which makes our life easier, certainly increases the time that it takes us to undertake our work. On top of that, it actually normally makes our work a little bit more efficient, which leads to costs being pretty efficient as well. So it's good for everyone when clients are really open and liberal with giving us what we ask for and what we need to do our work.
Stephen, that's some really, really useful information for our viewers. Thank you so much for coming along today. A couple of quick questions so that people can know a little bit about you and how to get in contact with you. Firstly, can you tell us, how is this a business that you got into?
I trained to be an accountant. Tried to be an accountant in a tax practice for a short period of time, and really was not interested at all in sitting at a desk and doing tax returns, and decided to go into transactions. And then from transactions, prices are being talked about all the time, ended up doing a lot of valuation work, and nowadays it's 100% of what I do. So I like it. It's a really interesting practice area. No 2 days are the same, and it's a really fascinating part of the commercial world.
Having known you for quite some time, I know that you've had a major focus in your business on M&A, but what are you seeing in terms of the number of businesses being valued in distress in the marketplace at the moment?
Look, it's pretty steady. We find that there was a time back in COVID where the numbers went through the floor, and I think that was consistent with what we saw throughout the broader insolvency industry with activity being quite restrained at that point. But since then, it's pretty steady. I mean, we would commonly see a couple of engagements every month that are driven by distress scenarios, or people, at the very least considering their options around what they do and around how they deal with their business in light of poor trading conditions. So it's pretty steady. Certainly that's what we expect to continue to see. I mean, there's interesting economic headwinds in the market that are affecting some businesses. Other businesses equally are going quite well, but it all tends to average out so far as what we see in our practice.
Fantastic. Anyone who wants to get in contact with Stephen, you'll find his details for his business and how to get in touch with him just below. Stephen, thank you so much for coming along today. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Liam. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, guys, and we'll see you on the next video.
Sales video. Have you ever seen those?
Yes, it is not that. No. So we thought it'd be so I thought it'd be worth getting some information from the horse's mouth. Nope, I'm not going to say that. Why did I say it?
Sorry, Liam. Has this ever happened before?
Melissa will have fun with that. She puts bloopers on the ends of my videos.
Really?
So
Okay, I'm going to look at the camera and not you.
Yeah,
Because when I
good.
look at you, I laugh.
Good.